Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. One of the main ways that black people have been lulled into a false sense of something resembling security in the society has been through the white media trying to give us a false memory and a false idea of what the past and the present are. This lying narrative of America making progress, that the American story is one of change and forward movement, is one of the main lies, in fact, the biggest lie on the planet, certainly the biggest lie in American society. As Dr. Claude Anderson and others have chronicled and documented for you, there has been no difference, been no change, been no progress. Certainly not for us. The only thing that's changed has been some of the cosmetics. If you have a black person who claims that he's a mayor, or that he's a senator, or that he's president, and this individual either lacks the power or refuses to use their power on behalf of black people, then not a doggone thing has changed. He might as well be the butler. But it's not just the condition and position of black people. There's been a lie that has been pushed on us every minute of every day. Another lie happens to be the idea that each successive generation has been better than the one before, especially when it comes to the dominant society. Why all those good white folks who ran out to the suburbs to get away from black people in the 1950s and 60s, well, their kids, Generation X, starting with them, they were different. They were the children of the civil rights revolution, the post-civil rights generation, the first generation born after the civil rights movement. So surely they would be different, right? But of course, that's been a lie. The lying conceit that the same idea of racism that was being nurtured and protected by the racists who were living in the cities somehow evaporated when they moved out to the suburbs. The same people who had gone to war with Dr. King in the 1960s, determined to make sure that black people stayed corralled in their areas, were deprived of wealth, were attacked and killed with impunity, that these same people somehow had a change of heart in 1968, and that they were somehow teaching their children differently. This has been one of the main lies that the white media has pushed. They use TV shows and movies and television so-called news to push that lie that, oh, these kids are living in desegregated schools. And, oh, look at these TV shows, why you got these white kids who have black friends. For a while, there were some people who actually bought into it. They wanted to believe it. They wanted to believe that progress was being made, but reality always has the last word. Racism is not taught at your local Ku Klux Klan clavern. Racism is not taught at your local country club. Racism starts in the home. It is taught to them from the cradle. And what we have found is that there's been a reality check the last 10 or so years, particularly the last 5 to 6, where we got to see who was teaching their kids racism, and it was pretty obvious who it was. In June 2015, Dylan Roof, who was barely in his 20s, went to a church and slaughtered a group of black grandmothers and their pastor. A few months later, you had a handful of white supremacists who used 4chan as their virtual clavern, and they did a video of themselves, guns in hand, bragging that they were going to force the Black Lives Matter protesters to stop demonstrating in front of their local police precinct house. Obviously, the police and sheriff's departments were involved, with these young punks as their front men. They got themselves beat up and ran off the block, but what it showed was this wasn't a bunch of old, grimy 60-year-olds doing this stuff. This was the young white generation who was doing this. Kyle Rittenhouse, of course, stands out, but there are also a couple of other incidents more recent than that. For about the last year or so, you've had white supremacist trash like Christopher Rufo, who have been manufacturing hysteria over critical race theory. And apparently his gripe that he and his fellow white supremacists in the Manhattan Institute and Fox News and others have been pushing is that with these books, these classroom teachers, they're teaching the idea that white youth are just born racist and they're not. Why there's not a racist bone in their bodies? Well, apparently he hasn't been reading the headlines. In Texas, you had a group of students at Aledo High School who got caught on their phones holding a virtual auction of their black classmates where they were doing a mock auction. How much would you pay for so-and-so black classmate? Bet you didn't see Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham talking about that. And that happened earlier this year in April when this incident came to the media's attention, or rather when they were willing to talk about it. So the same people who have been telling us that, oh no, why are you teaching that there's inherent racism going on among a certain portion of the population? Why? You're teaching that the white youth are inherently racist and born that way. First of all, critical race theory doesn't say that anybody is born racist. It says that they're taught racism from an early age. And this latest incident proves it. Well, that's the reason why they don't want anyone talking about race at all. Precisely because critical race theory is right. It hits the nail on the head. And what's the excuse for this going to be? Are we going to say that they were just people of their time? The same lie that we're always told about every white supremacist, from the founders of the country to Christopher Rufo, they're just men of their time. Are these high school kids a bunch of Dixiecrats? Are they a bunch of angry white suburbanites who were mad about affirmative action? Are these a bunch of unreconstructed Confederates? Was that what Dylan Roof was? He was just an embittered white male who couldn't adjust to the post-Civil War period. Is that what it was? He's 22, not 152. And yet, this is what the white media wants us to believe. They've been teaching this garbage. There is racism in this country, and it is taught from an early age, and it's taught in the homes. And we're finding out what homes white supremacy is being taught in. This is not the grandfathers or the fathers or the uncle, the proverbial uncle at Thanksgiving we're talking about here. These are the doggone kids coming out of these high schools. And they're not the only ones, by the way. You had another violent white supremacist attack by another group of white supremacist teenagers. This one, also in Texas, by the way, took place in Woodsboro, which is 30 miles north of Corpus Christi. And in this case, you had some white teenagers who are allegedly on the school football team, and they called themselves running around with a taser looking for black teenagers that they could attack. They assaulted one teenager in particular who apparently knew who his attackers were, and he's hired a lawyer. The white media hasn't given this much attention at all. But what happened was his lawyers have contacted the school. They know exactly who these little mongers are and wanted to know, why is it that the school is still allowing these three hate criminals, these three thugs, to be able to participate in team school activities, and instead of having them expelled, they're apparently acting like they don't know what's going on. And what was the school's response? Their response was, well, this event didn't occur at school or at any school-sponsored or school-related activity, so we can't discipline them for this type of conduct when it occurs off campus. Now, that's a bald-faced lie. You got schools in Tennessee and other places, far as they're concerned, anything that black students do, they can have you suspended, they can have you expelled for things that didn't take place on campus all the time. This is another case of the classic, I'm white and I say so. This was not some random hate attack. This is the school making it very clear this is precisely the kind of environment that we're trying to create. We're trying to create an environment of white supremacist violence with impunity, and that black people are going to be targets. This stuff is not happening in spite of the school's efforts. It's happening because of these schools. Every major arena of the society has been captured by the white supremacists. And they are using every means that they can to try to embolden one another and to try to normalize attacking black people violently. And that's the point that has to be reached. It must be violent. Words ain't enough. Christopher Rufo has been trying to get things to this point the entire time. This has been what the Manhattan Institute's entire perverted exercise and phony outrage about critical race theory was meant to do. It was meant to justify this. They know exactly what's been going on. And what they want is to manufacture a phony narrative that's meant to justify these anti-black violent attacks. This is what Christopher Rufo's entire effort has been about. His entire mad campaign has been geared toward this. And the people pretending to be outraged, I'm just very angry. I don't know about what, but I'm angry. They know exactly what this was meant to do. This is supposed to be cover. Lee Atwater talked about that back in the 70s. The white supremacist segment of American society, and much of the non-white supremacist segment, truth be told, they understand the use of code words. They understand when it is that you're being deliberately vague about something. They understand when you're using one term as a proxy for someone else, when you're speaking metaphorically. They understand. They understand when it is when you're using code. They can understand that. There's more than one way to give a wink and a nod. As black people, we are supposed to be hyper on guard when it comes to the safety and security of our children. You call yourself harming a child, all hell is supposed to break loose. It's supposed to be understood by everybody that you do not do. So this is the white supremacist offensive. It's been going on for a long while now. As far as they're concerned, a thug with a badge, well, they can't be everywhere at once, so we want to make it very clear that wherever there's some white supremacist who's indoctrinated their little hell spawn with anti-black racism, well, there's a race soldier in training. And they're going to be attacking black children every chance they get. Kyle Rittenhouse and that white supremacist pack of crap that he was running around with, they thought to themselves that no matter what he does, he'll be charged as a minor. He got charged as an adult. You see, that's what these little white supremacist punks in training just do not understand and haven't quite accepted yet. You run around committing these adult-sized crimes, you are now likely to suffer adult-sized consequences. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power tools, because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. There is, of course, the element of the white media that is eagerly covering for and trying to conceal and downplay all of these white supremacist punk attacks, but there's also a strong element of denial among the black community. The problem we face is that we have so many white supremacists who are young now running around committing these race attacks, and in every case, they or their pals claim that they're not racist. Rittenhouse himself was on false news telling Tucker Carlson that he wasn't racist. Now, why would a man who shot 3 white people, 3 fellow white males no less, why is it that he would be denying that he's racist? What did race have to do with anything? Why would that even come up? Because he's lying? False news and Tucker Carlson, they know that he's lying, but this is the game that they play. Sure, he just hangs out with white supremacists at bars when he's not at Trump rallies and not on video saying he wants to shoot black people at the local CVS. This is the reason why we cannot afford to allow ourselves to be sucked into the Pollyanna-ish lies that the white media tells. Progress is not inevitable. A society that is not moving forward is in effect moving backwards. We cannot afford to buy into the white media's rose fields through rose-colored glasses propaganda that racism is a relic of the past, and the younger generation, why they're wholesale rejecting it. Because the reality, the evidence, says otherwise. Look at these white supremacist street gangs like the Proud Boys, or others like so-called Patriot Front. These are the clowns who used to call themselves Vanguard America, but one of their members was convicted for murdering Heather Heyer at the Charlottesville massacre, and they had to change their names afterwards. These punks are not a bunch of 40 and 50-somethings. That's the reality the white media simply will not talk about. The McMichaels are the exception. The Rittenhouses, Dylan Roofs, and 4chan terrorists, they're the norm. And the reason that we have this wave of young white supremacists running around killing people is precisely because this is what is being taught in their homes for the last 40 years. And the fact that we have this eruption coming up to the point that even the white media can't conceal it, this is the evidence that what's been taught in the home for the last 40 years and the last 20 years in particular has been exactly the opposite of what the white media has claimed. And it's also been the opposite of what the dominant society has been claiming. The white media will not speak these truths because that's their job, to run interference for the white supremacists, to waste our time with pointless chatter about how do we unify as a country. If they made it a point to call this racist violence for what it is, then they would have to call out a large part of their own audience and of the white media themselves. They are the voice of white supremacy. They need the people who have received material benefits from white privilege to continue propping up that system so that the white elite at the top continue to keep their wealth and their power. Seems for the last 25 or so years, most of these schools that you go to, if you just open somebody's locker or just look at somebody's desk, you're going to be finding yourself in a rampant cesspool of white supremacy. Klebold and Harris, those guys originally wanted to kill black people when they went to their school to have their rampage, but apparently they were too stupid to realize their parents ran away from black folks, so there weren't many black people to kill, so they took out their rage and their petulant violence on other white people. Nicholas Cruz, who committed that slaughter in Florida. I told you about how this guy was repeatedly posting racist views and racist postings online. Elliot Rogers. This guy went and killed a handful of people, and he was mad as hell. His rage was centered on the fact that as a half-white person, he couldn't understand why there were so many black men who were getting all the girls and getting all the female attention, and here he was with the BMW that his daddy bought for him, and he just couldn't understand why it was that the females ignored him. He just couldn't get it. He didn't understand it. It blew his mind and drove him into a homicidal rage. When are we going to have that conversation? The answer, we're not. So let's stop trying to talk about it. The real question is, what are we going to do to protect ourselves from all of these white supremacists who happen to be in these schools and on these football teams and who are running around looking for the next black person that they're going to attack? You have these punks who are sitting here calling themselves auctioning black students. That's just a hair away from them deciding to grab a taser and go attack the first black youth that they come across. And by the way, those punks who attacked that black teenager in Woodsboro, they also apparently attacked a number of other black people as well. It wasn't just one. It's like Neely Fuller has always said, by the time the average white person has gotten to age 13 or 14, especially by the time they're 15, they already know exactly what white privilege is and the necessity that it be preserved. They already know exactly what it is that they're dealing with. They have to. That's the reason why we don't let ourselves get sucked into these pointless games of moral and responsibility keep away. You guys are teaching racism. No, we're not. Yes, you are. We're not having arguments about that. White supremacy is what it is. We know who the perpetrators of it are. We know who's spreading it, and we know the effects that it has on us. This is part of the ongoing anti-black white supremacist war against us. If too many black folks are proving to be hard targets in the general society, then go after black children. And that white supremacist school board and those white supremacist teachers and superintendents and principals, they'll go ahead and cover for you because race war's on. Well, I say that black children have a right to live in safety and security. They have a right to not be worried that some gang of white supremacist thugs are going to attack them with a taser or in any other way. They have a right to dignity and respect. And if you got some white supremacists who are in the school calling themselves, denigrating them and holding mock auctions and such, we have a right to make sure that justice is done. We have a right to that. And if the principal or the superintendent or the school board has made it very clear that they're on team white supremacy, then we have a right to make sure that they are held to account as well. White supremacy is white supremacy no matter the age of the individual perpetrating it. These racist school boards have made anti-black violence into part of their regular study guide. Well, it's way past time that we turn justice into a mandatory part of the school curricula, and we'll be the ones who make sure they learn their lesson. Good day, and be one.